Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In cleaning my craft room up recently, I discovered that I had these foiling plates and die sets that I hadn't used yet. So I decided to create a card with them, and because of the season, I wanted to create something that had some fall colors to it. So I'm using this beautiful Aura foil. It's a gold, but it's got some iridescence to it, so it has some other color properties to it, and I thought it would be beautiful with these different foiling plates. So I'm cutting a few pieces of the foil, and I'm going to foil a bunch of these florals and butterflies, and I'm also going to foil the negative image of them as well. So if you've never used a Glimmer Machine before, you want to wait until the green platform light is ready. You put your foiling plates on there, put the pretty side of the foil facing the plates, and then I'm using hammer mill cardstock. Press the timer button, and once it's done, you put it through a die cutting machine for some pressure. With the solid foil plate, you do exactly the same thing. The only thing is you're not using the foiling plates, you're using the solid hot foil plate. You're still pressing the timer button, and you're still putting the pretty side against the plate, and then I'm still using hammer mill cardstock. But it's a great way to use up both parts of the cardstock, and I'm going to be using the positive image of the florals, but I'm going to be using the negative image of the leaves for this particular project. Because those leaf foiling plates are solid, I wanted to make sure to have some open areas where I could color them green, and the negative image of those foils were perfect for that. So whenever I do something like this, I like to have more than enough images for what I'm doing. So I'm not going to be using every single one of these on the card, but I will save the excess for future projects. I've got some fall floral colors here. I've got Mahogany, Lumberjack Plaid, Rusty Hinge, Fossilized Amber, and Peeled Paint. Everything will be listed and linked down in the description box below. But I'm using ink blending brushes to color those foiled images really easily. Now the foil doesn't actually get colored. It resists the distress ink. So by using a dye ink like this, you don't have to worry about coloring that foil and losing that gloss, that beautiful metallic gloss that you get from the foil. If you find that your foil gets a little bit dull, you can take a paper towel and just kind of buff it a little bit. That will take any excess ink off of that foil and regain the shine. I'm doing some of these layers with some of the darker colors, and then I'm doing some with some of the lighter colors. I want to have a large selection of color tones to choose from when I go to get to the point of putting my card together. And the easiest way to ink these up is to do them before die cutting. Every single one of these foil plates or foil images has a matching die to it. So by inking it up ahead of time, I can just really concentrate on where that ink is going. I don't have to worry about whether it's outside of the lines. There is a slight outline when you die cut with these. It's going to be colored because I've done the ink blending already. This is the easiest way to color those images. You could use markers if you wanted to color them that way, but this is much easier, and I find you get a nicer ink blend with it. So this was my choice for this particular project. And even at that, you could even take these images and not color them, or you could ink the cardstock ahead of time and then foil on top of it. It really just depends on what you like to do. I like to foil ahead of time and then do my ink blending, so I can pick and choose exactly what color goes where on everything and have a little bit of control that way. You can see how easy it is to blend these inks right on this cardstock, and these ink blending brushes make it super easy to do. I do grab some detailed ink blending brushes for some of the more intricate areas, like the center of those flowers that I first did at the beginning, the red ones. And I also take that same detailed blending brush sometimes, and I use it to just give it a little bit of dark ink in some areas where I want it, but I don't want to have a larger area. I just have a little bit more control with those detailed ink blending brushes than you do with the bigger ones. It really is a personal preference thing. I just wanted to be able to have some areas where I had some of the darker ink, but not lose the lighter ink with these as well. Once I have all of my butterflies and florals done, I'm very quickly going to ink blend the green on top of that foil for those leaves. And even if I happen to get some of that ink in an area where I don't necessarily need it, I know that I'm not using every single one of these images for this particular project. So I'm just concentrating on the ones that I'm going to be using. And even if when I do a future project, I have a little bit of ink that may not be the color that I'm using, I can ink blend over top of it just to dull that color. Now that everything is ink blended, I'm taking that napkin and I'm just buffing any ink, any excess ink that might be on top of that foil, just to make sure it's all removed. And you want to do this even if you don't necessarily notice that there's ink over the foil, because you might get ink on your fingers if there's a little bit there. There was a little bit of foil on that one image that didn't really come off when I pulled the foil off of the paper. So I noticed when I buffed it with that paper towel that that foil did come off. So I had a few white spots. So I just went back and ink blended those quickly just to make sure that I didn't have any ink or white areas in my images before die cutting them. To die cut them, I'm going to do just a couple images at a time, and you want to make sure to tape those dies in place just to make sure that your die is not going to shift while it's going through the die cutting machine. And you also want to make sure, because you're taping them down, that you don't tape on any foiled areas that you want to have or see in your card. That tape does affect the foiling and you get a bit of a mark from the tape. So make sure when you're placing your tape, you're placing it on an area that's going to be tossed away anyways. Don't want to make sure, or you don't want to put that tape anywhere that you have foil that you want to see or you want to use, because it will mark it, and it doesn't mark it very subtly, like you can really see it. So you want to make sure to be careful about that. I'm also not putting every single die cut on this piece to die cut it, because they would overlap each other and you don't ever want to have dies overlapping them. That's the first way to ruin a die set. So I'm only using a couple at a time. It makes it take longer. The alternative would be to foil these a little bit more spaced out so that I could die cut them at a time, but then you're using a little bit more foil than you really need to. So it does take a little bit longer to die cut this way, but it's a necessary thing so that I don't have dies overlapping each other. So I just have a red mat to kind of pull out the red from that center flower that I'm going to use in the center of my little arrangement. And I also put a cream mat over top of it. What I like to do when I have my acrylic block on top of it, just kind of holding it while it dries, is I kind of like to lay out where I think I'm going to put everything on top of that acrylic block. That way I can see it on top of my background. I can see exactly how everything is going to look. And then when I pull that block off, I'll have everything kind of placed where I want it to place on the card. It's just an easy way to kind of lay things out without having to do it right onto the card where you have to pull it off to glue everything anyways. By doing it this way, I can still have everything placed exactly where I want it, but I see how it looks on the background, so I know whether I've got my placement right. I also like to use Distress Collage medium to do this. I use the Distress Collage medium for most projects anyways. I like it because it dries matte and it dries clear, but the best part about using a liquid glue is you have some time to move and shimmy things in place, especially when you're doing something like this where you may want to lift it to tuck a leaf in or to tuck a different flower in. It makes it easy to know that you can do that, whereas a tape, you would have to start ripping things apart in order to be able to lift and tuck and move things. So a liquid glue here is ideal. And the Distress Collage medium, I don't remember if I already said it, but it dries completely matte and it dries completely clear. So if by chance I put a little bit too much in the area and it squeezes out, once it's dried, you're never even going to know it's there. It just gives you a little wiggle room that way as well. But most of the time for an image like this or images like this, I'm only putting the glue on the center of the flower or the end of the leaf. So it's really not anywhere where you can see it. I want to make sure that things are glued down well, but I also like it when my leaf kind of flips up a little bit or isn't completely glued down flat. It gives it a little bit more movement and dimension for me. For that center flower that I'm doing red, because I've got 5 separate petals on it, I'm just taking my fingers and I'm curving them to give them a little bit of easy dimension. You could put foam pop dots underneath the raised part of the petals. I don't, I only glue the center down. These are the type of cards that I tend to give to someone in person, so I don't tend to put them through the mail for them to possibly be flattened. when it's got a lot of dimension like this, I just don't. So that center flower, or that red flower, I'm going to put a couple of the big ones on top of each other and a couple of the small ones on top of each other. And I'm offsetting them, and this is going to make the flower look a lot fuller than it really is when you first die cut it. It also gives it a lot more dimension by layering and offsetting these things. And I'm absolutely loving the fall colors here in the fall floral vibe. Now, the great thing with this is for spring, you could do all spring colors, or say in the winter, you could do kind of more wintry colors. So these foiling plates and die sets have a lot of versatility when you just change up the color scheme to it. Now that everything is glued in place, I'm just taking some champagne glitter drops from Pink Fresh Studios, and I'm gluing them in the center of the flower, and then I'm just going to put a few on the background. I like to place them first, and then I will take my glue, and I'm still using the Distress Collage medium for this, as well as some tweezers. I'll just use the tweezers to kind of put them aside and then put the glue exactly where I had those drops, and then I'll use the tweezers to move them back again. This is a great way just to finish off the card and to tie in the glitter drop from the center of the flowers. This isn't something that I do often, but sometimes it just looks nice on the background of a card. I'll sit that aside to dry completely before doing anything else. And at this point, I actually think that this is the last step that I'm going to do on this card. I don't think I'm going to add any more. It's got a lot of texture and dimension to it already. I don't think it really needs much more. And I don't want to overload it, basically. So now that my card has completely dried, here are the fall florals. I think it looks really, really beautiful with that foiling, and it's got so much texture and dimension. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a fabulous day.